This is the story of Japan Airlines Flight 123. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a Boeing 747 SP cleared to go from Haneda Airport to Osaka Airport in Japan. So it was on the runway, cleared for takeoff. The crew was a very experienced crew, and the captain was teaching the first officer how to fly this second biggest plane in the world. So the plane took off, and then the gear went up, which is what we call V2, and flaps were retracted, and everything seemed to go normally. They were going to cruising altitude. I'm just using autopilot because I do not know how to climb without autopilot. And there we go. I set the speed, and there it was, going on its journey to Osaka. 12 minutes into the flight, the tail broke because the pressure in the pressure bulkhead went from here all the way to here. So the pressure was too much, and it needed a place to release the pressure. It chose this part of the plane. Now when the pressure got out of this part of the plane, the pressure was so much that it got its tail off. Let me show you what that looks like. So the plane was just flying at cruising altitude, just like I said, and then the tail got off. The plane tried to make a bank to the right so that it can return to the airport. So although I cannot recreate the tail breaking in Infinite Flight, I can turn off autopilot and show you how it looked like on the flight. So I disconnect the autopilot, and all of these are from my studies. All of these that I say are from the studies of Google, Wikipedia, and else. So the captain demanded a right turn back to the airport, but this turn seemed to be so steep. So the pilot told the first officer who was flying the plane, "Don't bank so much." Banking means what I am doing right now. "Don't bank so much," he said. Yet the first officer was accepting every time he said that. It seemed to not go back. No matter how much input they use, it seemed to not go back to its normal. So at one stage, it normalized, and then it banked again. This time to the left. This cycle repeated over and over and over again. This cycle is called the Dutch roll. The Dutch roll is a cycle where the plane banks left and right, left and right, left and right uncontrollably. And this did a Dutch roll because it lost its tail, and now it was almost uncontrollable. The Dutch roll was like a flowers, and because it wasn't so tight, like it wasn't a severe Dutch roll, but later in this flight it would be a severe Dutch roll. So the pilots continued to control this plane. The flight engineer told them that the hydraulics were running out. Now while the pilots were trying to control the plane, they met with another fate. The plane seemed to steep up, and then this process of steeping up, it lost speed, so it went down again. When it went down, it started to gain speed, so it went up. This phenomenon is called the phugoid motion, and this was happening in Japan Airlines Flight 123. So it seems as if I cannot recreate because my plane is not responding, but the plane got out of the lake, which is below us. Should I call this a lake or an ocean? Because I think it's an ocean. So they were slowly getting out of the ocean. So there they were. The pilots tried desperately to gain control, but this massive aeroplane, sorry if I stutter too much, but this massive aeroplane wouldn't cooperate. They tried to land, they tried to do everything. Over there at the passengers, there was chaos. There was people shouting, everyone getting out of their seats. But then the pilots reached up and turned on the turn on seatbelt sign. So that one, that sign will show the passengers to fasten their seatbelt and they should not get out of their seats. So the passengers did so. And sorry if I stuttered too much. I did not get ready before I made this video. By the way, talking about making the video, you might be wondering why I'm making the video like a millionth time now. I've made so many Japan Airlines Flight 123 videos. Well, all those were inaccurate and they were not from my studies, and these ones is from my studies. So when the tail was lost, everything was going worse and worse and worse, and this is where the Dutch roll became bad. The Dutch roll was worsening, and then the first officer said, "Should we try flaps up?" The captain said no. The captain believes that if the flaps wouldn't be set down because the tail was missing, and if the tail was missing, then the hydraulics line, which is what controls the plane, if the tail was missing, the hydraulics would be at 0, and this was confirmed by the flight engineer that the hydraulic pressures were at 0, and the cabin altitude warning was sounding. That meant that the people in the cabin, which was the passenger seats, were having a hard time to breathe. But the only thing that the pilots could do was descend, and the pilots couldn't descend. They were stuck in a phugoid motion, which I told you earlier was when the plane went up, and when it went up, it lost speed, so it pitched down. When it pitched down, it gained speed, so it went up. This cycle continued, and the pilots weren't aware. I mean, they were aware, but they couldn't do anything about it. These pilots are the pilots I considered the best pilots in the world. They tried everything to save their plane but couldn't do it. So the plane was slowly heading back to Handea, and the pilot increased the power on the right side, and slowly but surely the plane banked right to go to Handea. It banked right and banked right. It's banked so steeply, but there was nothing the pilots could do about it. So it was slowly going back to Handea Airport. So they decreased the power, and they were going back slowly to Handea Airport. So the pilots tried to use the rudder to control the aeroplane, but since the tail was blown off, including the rudder is this thing on the tail of the aeroplane, this thing over here. They tried to use the rudder on the back of the aeroplane, but like I showed you earlier, the rudder was missing, and so the inputs on the rudder were useless. So they were going to Handea Airport, but then the plane steeply went back to doing its thing. Yeah, it was going away from the airport. The ATC knew about this and called them, saying, Japan Air 123, Japan Air 123, you are moving farther away from Haneda Airport. The pilots were aware of this but couldn't do anything. The pilots put full engines on the right side, and that's when an idea popped up. They were in a phugoid motion, and they wanted to go back to a lower altitude. So why not put the engines down? The pilots noticed that when they put the engines back to idle, the plane goes down, because the engines are the only thing that makes speed in the aircraft. Now this was working, but the moment it pitched down, it gained speed again, and then it pitched up. So this idea was kind of useless, kind of useful, but they were trying their best. Now the flight engineer, who was normally sitting right here to check all the things that is happening, checked all the said, okay, sorry, I'm stuttering a lot, but I was not ready to make this video, and that's why I'm stuttering a lot. Said that the gear must be put down so that the plane can slow down and it can go down. So this idea was useful. It was a great idea. The reason why the gear is put down to slow down the aircraft is because when air flows on the gear, it will not affect the plane, which means that it will go down. What I mean by not affecting the plane is that airflow wouldn't go past the wings, so the aeroplane would move down. The pilots, or specifically the captain, thought about this. The captain normally sits here, but I cannot recreate that. And no, the captain normally sits here, but this time the captain was sitting there. The captain had to think for a moment. He had all the power in his brain. In his brain, he had all the power, and if he says yes or no, that would have been done. And so he had to think for a moment. Putting down the gear would have slowed the plane, but it wouldn't have much effect. It was a heroic idea, but so was everything else in this flight. So he put the gear down. Since they need hydraulics, which was blown away by the tail, they used the gravity drop. The gravity drop is what is known it drops the gear with its own weight, and that's how the gear went down without hydraulics. So the Dutch roll was getting worse, as shown, and they were actually descending. They wanted to descend because the cabin had zero pressure, which meant that no one was breathing well. Oxygen masks drop, but oxygen masks can only go up to 15 minutes, about 15 minutes. So it might be 15 minutes, or it might not be. So the plane was going down, and the flight engineer said, how about flaps down? But since they didn't have a hydraulics, this wouldn't be possible, right? Wrong. It would have been possible because the hydraulics was starting to come back. So they put the engines to the max because they were going too low. Now they were approaching the tallest mountain in Japan, called Mount Fuji. So they were approaching that mountain, and the pilot, specifically the captain, said, right stand, we'll hit a mountain, right stand. The first officer couldn't do anything but accept this because it was the captain's order to do a right turn. So since there is no mountain ahead of us, but in reality there would be a mountain, I'm sorry that there is no mountain. So they put engines that are on the right side to the max. slowly but surely, the plane started to go right. But there were other mountains. Japan is filled with mountains. So they not only had to make a right turn, but they also had to ascend. So they ascended. But ascending would mean that they would have a high altitude, and the cabin had zero pressure. So they were in a bad situation where nothing they did seemed to do anything. So the first officer declared for the flaps to be set to 10 degrees, but it showed that the flaps were already at 15 degrees and were decreasing more up to 30 degrees. Now this significant change in flaps led to a change of a lift between the right and left wing. I'm not giving you the full documentary. If you want the full documentary, you can go to Air Crash Investigation on YouTube. So it made a full 360-degree turn. They said, power, flaps up, but the flaps were already up. Lift it up, the captain said. Nose up, power, the captain said. So they were descending to a low altitude until the plane hit a nosedive. That meant that the plane was nosediving down to the ground. Now the right wing continued to dip and until the crash, and the cabin altitude warning was sounding, which meant that the passengers were having a hard time breathing, and so the plane was going down. It was having a stall now. So they tried everything. They lifted the power up, but they couldn't do anything. The plane just seemed to become a brick. They were now passengers of their own aircraft. The plane hit a very sharp right turn. I'm sorry that I cannot recreate what happened, but then the data indicates that the plane did a very sharp turn until the right wing hit Mount Takamakahara, one of the tallest mountains in Japan. While this happened, this is the moment where it hit Mount Takamakahara, but my plane seemed not to hit it. And then boom. Now the right wing hit Mount Takamakahara, making it go upside down and then crashing into the same mountain. Boom. So they sent a search and rescue team, but that one was aborted because it was already at night time when they found the plane. So they aborted the search and rescue team. It says that there would have been more people that survived, but there wasn't, because they chose not to do a search and rescue team. And now, after at the next moment, they did a search and rescue team. There were 30 people that survived the crash. There would have been more survivors, but there were 30 people. Now about a lot of those 30 people died in the hospital, so which led to 4 people surviving, which made this the deadliest accident caused by one aircraft. Everyone refers to this as the deadliest accident because it counts. It's the deadliest accident. But now I guess I have to say peace. This crash was very sad, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.